So without much ado, I would just get into the dive into the topic for the discussion today, which is the breakthroughs in management of acute myeloid leukemia. And if you look at the last 2 years, perhaps the maximum number of drugs that have come in to manage acute myeloid leukemia is quite significant as against to the last 2 decades that we have been taking care of leukemic patients. To me, the three most important thing was understanding the biology of the disease, which is the breakthrough, the epigenetic targeting for controlling myeloid leukemia, and also exploiting pathways and targets for therapeutic benefit, mainly as a single agent or for that matter, combining with other agents, including chemotherapy. And that has really changed treatment landscape for AML. So when you look at understanding the biology of the disease, we do understand that cytogenetics has a great role to play, and this paper from Grimwade, follow-up of 10 years after his seminal paper, demonstrated the utility of understanding cytogenetics in terms of outcomes for this patient, but for the patient. And we do understand also that the AML, from where it comes from, also has got its impact in terms of outcome, and age has got the biggest role, perhaps, in terms of outcome, not only from the perspective of them being able to tolerate treatment, and also from the perspective of them harboring so many adverse molecular abnormalities that render them quite insensitive to standard modes of treatment. So we do also understand the role of from where the AML evolves, which is mainly secondary AML, and also AMLs that are not associated with the myelodysplastic syndrome, and also some of the few AMLs who evolve from following chemotherapy called therapy-related AML. So let us look at the molecular mechanisms involved in AML, which has helped us understand devise therapies for treating this otherwise difficult condition to treat. And when you look at what happens at the nuclear level, we do understand there are epigenetic changes, transcriptional dysregulation, which alter gene expression, and also we do understand one of the key mutations that occur are in the DNMT3A, IDH1/2, and the 1011 and the TET2 mutants, which induce DNA methylation changes and histone modification. So there is also the transcriptional repression in the promoter gene, the CpG islands that we call, again involving the epigenetic mechanisms, and activation of what is called as incorrect transcriptional start sites that are observed. And there is hypermethylation of these TSS in the target genes, and the hypermethylation is associated with activation of proto-oncogenes in an increased genomic instability. So we do understand that the IDH1/2 and the TET2 mutations are mutually exclusive, and also the IDH1/2 mutant forms inhibit only the wild type TET2 function. So again, gives the reason why they are mutually exclusive. We do understand also that the SEPBPA mutations and the aberrant fusions, including MLL, RUNX1, RUNX1T1, results in disruption of the transcriptions of the hemopoietic and the myeloid differentiation, and these events lead to activation of survival signaling pathways, which actually allows for, which actually stimulates self-renewal. And in addition, there can be mutations involving P53, which results in enhanced abnormal proliferation. Then comes the cytoplasmic processes and what happens at trisomy. We do understand one of the most common thing is the FLT3 tyrosine kinase domain mutation, which can be both TKD and also the TK, and also they induce activation of the mitogenic signaling pathways, which involve proliferation factors such as RAS and increased self-renewal. There is the other cytoplasmic pathway where there is an aberrant cytoplasmic localization of the nucleophosmin 1, which is translocated, and they interact with proteins known as the ARF, which again blocks the tumor suppressor pathways. And we do understand the genomic profiling in terms of the different molecular abnormalities that are seen in the AML genome. And at the molecular level, this is extremely heterogeneous, and there are numerous single gene mutations and co-occurring mutations, and this completely complicates in adding to the complexity of the diagnosis and treatment outcomes in AML. And many of these mutations are co-occurring, including the nucleophosphine 1 and IDH1, for example, and IDH2, the FLT3 and nucleophosphine 1. And the thickness of the ribbon actually contributes to the, reflects the amount of, interaction between these two mutations. And the mutations often occur together in the same patient, suggesting that specific leukemia cells arose from clones with different molecular profiles at the time of leukemogenesis. So we do understand there are a lot of subsets, and they are quite mutually exclusive, and these can be broadly classified into various driver mutations in AML, and the size of the spheres reflect actually how commonly they are occurring in AML. And if you will see, the most common is, of course, the NPM1, the FLT3, and these are categorized into signal transduction oncogenes, splicing mutations, epigenetic modifiers, chromatin modifiers, transcriptional factors, and AML licensing mutations, and NPM1 is perhaps the most common. We do also understand that the variety of these mutations vary, and much of the mutations are more commonly seen in the elderly population, particularly those associated with epigenetic mechanisms. So we do understand that this is a whole landscape, and what we understand is the epigenetic mechanism. So far, we never did understand clearly what is the mechanism in which hypomethylating work, but we also now understand that there are certain abnormalities that can be identified at the epigenetic level, which render the disease susceptible to the hypomethylating agent. So in conclusion, we would say that genetic events have variance in the strength of leukemic drive and the disease constitution. It is a reflection of either very strong drivers like the NPM1 or a serial acquisition of mutations, and there is also co-mutational interactions, and many of the disease alleles are found in clonal hematopoiesis, where an indication for early intervention, most notably in clonal cytopenias of undetermined significance, may be considered. So let us look at epigenetic targeting and controlling AML. We do understand this is a standard approach for AML, and the use of hypomethylating agents usually came as an afterthought when patients relapsed. But now we do understand that the upfront use of decitabine in those patients who cannot receive intensive chemotherapy. This was the MD Anderson group work on decitabine. Decitabine and azacitidine have been available since the 1960s, and actually they were designed as cytosine for replacing cytosine residues in the DNA, and but subsequently it has been understood that they have hypomethylating mechanisms which can actually activate or silence genes. This was the concept that was looked at by the MD Anderson group, and this is one of the first demonstration that perhaps the results of using hypomethylating agents is perhaps as good as using intensive chemotherapy, if not better, in those patients in the elderly subgroup. Then came the phase 3 study of azacitidine. I cannot include all the studies over here, but the phase 3 study of azacitidine versus conventional care, which clearly demonstrated an improvement in survival for these patients in terms of the progression-free survival in these patients, which was significant, wherein it was around 6.5 months for the patients receiving intensive chemotherapy or any other form of treatment, including best supportive care, and it was 10.4 months for the ASA group. So we have numerous studies which have demonstrated low-intensity regimens, and some things that really stand out is the use of hypomethylating agents, which clearly set the ball rolling for its use as an agent of choice in patients who cannot otherwise receive intensive chemotherapy, and this is true for most elderly patients. So what about the BCL2 inhibition in this patient? We know that BCL2 is overexpressed, and BCL2 contributes to poor response to patients when being treated. And borrowing a page from the other tumors, including the lymphoid malignancies, including CLL, when venetoclax was used as a single agent in acute myeloid leukemia, it did not induce the results that were expected. But there was a strong signal when it was combined with hypomethylating agents, and this is the graph that you see, wherein you got almost the same response as you would with intensive chemotherapy over here. And this was a dose-finding study which looked at what are the dose that can be appropriate for venetoclax. And that's how we came to the dose of 400 milligrams per day. So this is the more recent study, which was a randomized study looking at azacitidine plus venetoclax in the treatment of naive patients with CML, otherwise ineligible for induction therapy. And in a nutshell, this is the important graph which demonstrated improvement in the median overall survival, which was benefited the combination group of azacitidine and venetoclax as against azacitidine alone. And and this is one of the randomized studies which actually has settled the issue of a combination of using venetoclax with hypomethylating agents as an additive measure for improving outcomes in these patients. You can see that there is a significant improvement in the overall survival in these patients. And this was irrespective of whatever risk group that the patient had. And this forest plot will demonstrate it clearly demonstrates that there was a survival advantage with the combination of azacitidine with venetoclax. What about FLT3 inhibiting strategies? We do understand from the RATHL study that the not so specific FLT3 inhibitor, which is midostaurin, and the more specific targeted FLT3 inhibitor, which is gilteritinib, were approved for treatment of acute myeloid leukemia with the FLT3 mutation, whether they were tandem repeats or a TKD mutation. They are approved in the combination with standard 3+7 regimen. And let us go to we know that the RATIFY study demonstrated an improved progression-free survival in these patients. And those patients who underwent a transplant in remission tend to have a better outcome when combined with, in those patients who use midostaurin. But the more compelling thing was the use of midostaurin as a maintenance therapy, including use of midostaurin in combination with chemotherapy and using it in maintenance. And for sustained responses, of course, stem cells had to be used. Stem cell transplant had to be used. So what about gilteritinib? It's a more specific second-generation TKI. And the phase 3 Admiral study was the one that explored relapse refractory FLT3 positive ITD mutated patients, and clearly FLT3 was compared against the investigator choice, and that demonstrated a better progression-free survival in these patients. The QuANTUM-R study was the next generation FLT3 inhibitor, which was quizartinib, which has been in existence for the past 7-8 years. And this was the study which looked at using quizartinib as a single agent, and they definitely showed a signal in terms of an overall survival benefit, which was which was a therapeutic equipoise actually, and there was not clearly accepted in the mainstream therapy for such patients. But subsequently, the more recent QUASAR study, which used quizartinib, which is in the AML-001 study, demonstrated clearly that there was a survival benefit for the use of quizartinib, which was almost double when compared to the other modes of therapy for these patients. What about using the IDH2 and IDH1 inhibitor? We know that the IDH1 and IDH2 inhibitor are more commonly mutated in patients in the elderly population. And this was the first IDH2 inhibitor which is designed, which is enacidinib, which demonstrated that there was a possibility for patients to encounter, to achieve CRs in these patients. And the longer that you gave the drug, the longer, I mean, the chances of achieving deeper responses was there. But also you might understand, appreciate from this graph that there were a lot of deaths on the way, and there was a loss of response as we go. And but when we used it in combination with azacitidine, there was definitely an improvement in the event-free survival in these patients. So again, saying that probably these targeted agents will not work as a single agent, but more common. But when combined with hypomethylating agents, they tend to have a synergistic response. And the other IDH1 inhibitor, which is ivosidenib, was used. And again, as is true for the IDH2 inhibitor, this also demonstrated CR and in patients, in a few patients, not all, and it was not a durable responses, but allowed as a bridge to transplant for such patients. What about myelotargets? It's had a waxing and waning course in its use in AML treatment. Always understood that it has a benefit, but because of the toxicity, it went out of repute. But now it has come back into treatment for acute myeloid leukemia. And these are some of the studies that we know, especially the phase 3 alpha study, which demonstrated its utility, especially in patients with the favorable risk co-binding factor leukemia and those patients with intermediate risk group, but it did not have a benefit for patients in the high risk or the poor risk group. So geo-based, the meta-analysis has a valuable addition to the treatment of co-binding factor leukemia. There is a utility for its use in intermediate, and the data would say that there is a 10% improvement in survival in patients with the intermediate risk group myeloid leukemia. And this is, I'll rush through this we already know. It is old drugs in a new bottle, which is the CPX 351. Yes,
So
I'm just
request you
finishing.
to please.
Yeah. So the last agent that we would like to look is the hedgehog inhibitor, which is a glasdegib, which is a very exciting molecule. We know that the use of glasdegib along with the use of low-dose Ara-C demonstrated clearly in the study an improvement in the event-free survival and a trend towards better overall survival. And again, they were more beneficial in those patients with the good and the intermediate risk group profile patients, and these are all elderly patients. So in conclusion, I would say that the understanding of the molecular makeup and the interactions have helped AML better in order to prognosticate, and the benefits have been more so for patients unfit for intensive chemotherapy. Targeted therapy is not looking like rendering durable responses, but may function as a bridge to transplant. And also, the future trials will provide us answers to use of targeted agents in combination with chemotherapy or hypomethylating agents, or the low-intensity therapy to decrease morbidity and mortality in this otherwise neglected subgroup of elderly AML. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you.